Good morning, comrades. You are listening to WHIPLP New Orleans 102.3. This is Good Morning, Comrade. Today on the show, we have a very special episode. We have two incredible guests. One guy been on here once before, is returning champion, and recently elected to the Democratic Socialists of America National Political Committee. Uh, Ladies and gentlemen, it's John Lewis. What's up, John?
Oh, doing good, doing good.
Yeah, and also we have first time guest on the show. Welcome. Also recently elected to the co-chair of the New Orleans Democratic Socialists of America. We have Wash Field. What's up, Wash?
Hi, I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, and I wanted to have the both of you on the show because both of y'all were delegates to the uh, DSA convention, which just took place about 2 weeks ago as of recording and as of airing. And I just kind of wanted to, we've covered it in the past, and I've been a delegate to it in the past, and I just sort of wanted to talk about, what is convention, sort of like questions like that. What happened at this convention? What was sort of the dynamics that were at play going into this? What happened, like I mentioned earlier, and then we have to look forward, not just at the national level for an organization like Democratic Socialist America, which is again the largest socialist organization in the United States, but also what lays ahead. So that's sort of like how we wanted to kind of envision this conversation happening. So I guess first I can kick it to Wash, and you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. So I'm Wash. Thank you for the introduction. Newly elected co-chair of the DSA New Orleans, and my day job is I'm a public health professional. So that's kind of something that I'm really into. But I think that my experience at convention was really interesting as someone that hasn't gone to something like that before. In comparison, I look forward to hearing about John's kind of how this compares to the online convention, particularly because I know that people talked a lot about how the kind of dynamics that people had at the convention, how they treated each other was different in this because it was in person. I I I just had a really I thought it went really well in how many just connections that you made with people just walking around, and how many, particularly for southern chapters, delegates from the southern chapters and rural chapters, how we tended to find each other and put a commitment to continuing to work with each other in the future, because I do think that there's definite push towards statewide and regional and generally more coalition between chapters, at least from my experience in talking to people at the convention. So that was one thing that really stuck out to me. I'd love to hear John's take on that.
Yeah, this was my second DSA National Convention and my second DSA national level in person event. I went to the very first, and it relates a bit to what Wash was just talking about some of the camaraderie, or like just like sharing of things, trying to unite, trying to show solidarity, right? So I went to the very first in person thing that we had back after the pandemic, which was our Multiracial Organizing Institute last year in Minnesota. And like this was kind of like a low stakes like training institute conference. You wouldn't call it a conference so much because it was more of a closed group of about 40-ish people or so. But very low stakes political conversations, diving into some things and kind of like really getting to spend time getting to know other comrades, discussing things, sharing things, which was very, very good from like a sense of like leaving from there. Like, yeah, like I talked to people from coast to coast of this country, from the northern border all the way down to the southern border. I got to actually talk with people from all over this country and talk with our comrades about like what were they interested in, what were the things they were working around, what was specifically around multiracial organizing, but it was still just good, right? But and when it comes to the convention, like, and we'll get a little bit deeper into some of this later, it's like it's kind of like, like we have these high stakes political questions, we have these high stakes political votes, we have these things where like, what are the stuff is going to be debated, what are the things that are not going to be debated, like these things are going on for an entire month, for an entire 120 days almost leading up to convention, right? So it's kind of like a big thing where it's like, where we do have instances of solidarity forming and the ability to communicate with things, but since the stakes are a bit higher, there's also like that bit of, like, are you talking to me because you want my vote? Or are you talking to me because you are trying to whip for your specific thing? Or are you talking to me because you want to recruit me to your clique? Instead of like people just feeling more comfortable to just kind of like have some of those interactions. But not that those organic interactions don't happen there either. And compared to the virtual one, I'll close with is that the virtual one was absolutely more widely attended, but there's still that difference in like we can't in like there isn't really a space to like have a lot of conversation without people who may not already be in contact with is the other side of it. But there's some answers for that people have worked out and stuff too.
Yeah, and a little context for that for the listening audience. The previous convention, which happened 2 years ago, was in the middle of like the highest points of the COVID, crisis in America, which is obviously, it's something that's not ended. It's actually sparking up again more than ever. But in 2020, what was it? 2020, the convention was 2021. The convention was completely remote, so all of the delegates were. And I was a delegate at this convention. That was the only convention I had attended in the past. It was totally remote, and it was actually really. It was like ran the gamut of like being an interesting experience because you're able to participate in like the highest level of like decision making within DSA, but also like it didn't have the sort of social component other than like we had like a couple of card nights with some random people who signed up for it or anything like, but you couldn't really have like a party or anything like that. You would have like everybody's on like it's basically just a way of like saying this is a social Zoom call instead of a work Zoom call or a business Zoom call. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But anyway, but yeah. So what were you sort of thinking, both of y'all? Because John, this was not your first convention, and you were running for National Political Committee, so you were like going into convention had some certain ideas and prospects and goals for it. And then Wash, this was your first convention. Maybe we could start with you, Wash. What were you sort of thinking as you were going in, to this convention for the first time?
It was really exciting as someone that is, hate to bring it back to living in the South so often, but I think that was like a really big focus of the things that we did surrounding this convention. Like, for example, New Orleans DSA, but really John as like a huge contributor to the whole workload of this, put together like a Southern organizing forum, whenever we were looking at NPC candidates, the National Political Committee that we voted on. And I feel that there was like some touching on needs to, where we're putting resources. Anyway, point being, it was really interesting to hear from all of these different groups in different areas that have fundamentally different political situations, and as a result, extremely different takes on what should be done in the organization. It was really interesting being in a weird, almost like moderate position within the leftist sphere, because we're having to be like, well, maybe we should not give up on all every single Democrat that exists. Perhaps we should try pulling them onto our side rather than immediately, making enemies with everyone, which was, I feel nervous saying it here. It's such a controversial opinion whenever I was in the space, which I felt very, very intrigued by, coming from a space where I was like one of the only socialists that exists openly around this area. Mm-hmm. Also, a lot more handing out of materials as you walk by than I expected. A lot of documents.
Mm-hmm. It is nice to not feel alone for the first time, or at least not feel isolated that you're part of something bigger. John, as you
Definitely.
were sort of like running in the convention, what was your sort of thoughts and prospects for the whole thing?
I came into it. So my first convention when I was like a baby socialist, I'd only been activated for like, and I use activation to say that like once you become aware of like the disaster that is capitalism and that there are alternatives, like there is no like turning back. I don't think, right? So like by being like a what I still call like maybe going from like my baby socialist era to like becoming a more full socialist and going to my first convention, like I just didn't know what was going on. I didn't know fully what was going on. Still picking up on everything, you know. Like I'm used to like doing like national, like restate or regional conferences and conclaves from like being in Sigma, which is a black service frat, and like doing other stuff like that. But really like picking up on some of the stuff of how DSA works. That was kind of like my first one, and also like uniting with the rest of the Louisiana delegates, kind of similar to what Wash was talking about. But then literally like maybe a week or two after that convention was when like some major things within like terms of DSA as an organization happen, right? Like, and then as for us as Louisianans, right? Like, we get hit by a Category 5 hurricane, and we get the Iron Dome, vote during this time period as well, and like so like going coming from it, I'm like, oh yeah. It's like this is a very, very difficult time, you know. So it's like, and then coming from that, and then like having to go through the process of like some people from my chapter leaving too because of some of those political decisions at that time period. Like that really kind of like put me into a spirit of like, okay, so this convention that I was just at and interacting with this national organization has a different impact on like my local organizing, the things that I'm doing here where I'm at, a lot more than just like how I thought about it before. And so that kind of shaped my kind of track path for the next 2 years that led to me being a candidate and then ended up on the interim steering committee for the entire organization at this convention. And I kind of went into it with the mindset of like, I'm like I prepare myself from around the idea that like, like I'm coming into this from the sense of like I'm running and I could potentially lose. I could not win this race. So that prepares me for the possibility to put my best foot forward, but also not go above and beyond and begin to engage ungenuinely or uncharacteristically, right?
Mhm.
So then I can kind of come from this and like, hey, like I just want to talk to you and see what's up and see what you're doing and see how you're organizing and learn about how y'all have organized all of your students, all of your YDSAs or your young DSA chapters in your state of Michigan into like having a very productive force, or how these socialists in Delaware have a direct line to their state legislature via their like socialists in office, and they have a developed socialist in office committee, and they're a small chapter, right? Like talking with all of these different people and learning about like the different ways that they're contributing, the different things that they're doing, and kind of like the different horizons beyond like what we do here, which we still have stuff that we excel at that we do pretty good too, I think. So, but yeah, it was very interesting, like coming into it. But those things that happened around that first convention definitely like shaped the path going forward. And I had to bring that up because the key thing is that a part of like interacting in a democratic organization with an uppercase D, like DSA, is that like you have the ability to impact the organization, right? Like decisions were made that absolutely impacted what I was doing and impacted the stuff that we had going on. And I set out with a mission to be like, yo, like we need to change this. Like we have to do something about this. We have to like acknowledge that these things are going on and acknowledge that like these decisions do impact everybody, right? And then kind of work our way around from there and figure out how we can find a better way of going forward with it. And that's been my whole thing since.
And holding the whole thing together too is really important because I don't know, there is a sort of like there is, in my opinion, sort of a utility of having a broad sort of like socialist, coalition that exists in this country, and we aren't always going to agree with one another, and we're going to have ways, and we're going to have ways that we're going to have to sort of like determine what the direction of the organization is going to be, and the most appropriate form for that is something like convention, where we can sort of settle these questions at least for 2 years. Let's pause real quick for station ID. You're listening to WHIVLP New Orleans 102.3. This is Good Morning Comrade. We have Wash and John on the show. We're talking about the DSA convention. So just to kind of get a little bit more specific about some of the questions that were sort of like up for discussion and debate as in the run up to this convention. What were they? And we can start with you, John, and then maybe you can fill in as well, Wash. What were the sort of the big questions leading in the convention, and then we can sort of discuss after what the sort of resolutions of that were.
Okay, yeah. So I'll find a way to phrase this in. So like, there's one big political question that like, especially for people who have been like activated like socialists or anti-capitalist people who have been organizing, doing other stuff like that. They can't, like you can't avoid these types of questions coming up. But one of the big ones was how we relate to the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, Palestinian liberation, and one of our elected reps who's no longer endorsed by the organization and got censored by the organization, his vote to fund the Israeli military with his Iron Dome vote. And also several other things that he did, like meeting with Netanyahu, traveling to Israel, other things that like you would typically expect to see from like APAC candidates, other things like that, who have been, even just harsh opponents of just progressive Democrats, right? Not even going as far left as socialists, just groups that have been harsh opponents of people who aren't towing that line against like apartheid or other stuff. And so this was one of those things that really, really, really shaped the major question of the organization going forward. From really happened almost immediately after our last convention and going all the way into this one, in which like there were calls for a special convention. You had letters that chapters across the country signed on. You even had the kind of the dissolution of the attempted or almost dissolution of our boycott, divestment, and sanctions and Palestinian liberation working group, which was
by the MPC.
Yeah, by our national political committee as well, right? So, like these things kind of shape that question. And the key things that came from it was like, well, like we don't really like what's going on here. We don't, a lot of folks express that. We don't like what's going on here. We don't feel like we have enough say in like how some of these political decisions are being made. And there's no real path for people to go about doing that. So this kind of branched out from not just this political question, but into like a structural question as well. How is our organization structured, right? Like, you would say that the way you would hold NPCers like myself accountable is by having a special convention, but we've never called a special convention in the last 10 years of the organization, so that's not going to happen, right? So
yeah, you might as well like call a unicorn to fix the problem, right?
right. So you have all of these other things that come up from there, like, well, how do we allow for more uppercase democratic oversight of the organization, of our national leadership, which I very much lend in favor of, and also how do we resolve some of these political questions? And then of course there's the issues of like trans and queer rights, the attacks on like school boards, education, the pushing of like individualism and fascism, and trying to like then these groups really trying to like hone that in, especially in our region of the country, right? So there's a lot of these questions that are all flowing around, and it's kind of like slipped into like this convention where we started trying to solve some of those problems.
Mm-hmm. Wash?
Yeah, there's a couple other things that stuck out to me, but also going off of what John said about the trying to gain more clarity about what is happening on the national level in our organization. I think that was a big focus. I think that with the anti-Zionism vote, a lot of it was not only political, but largely arguments over how it was structured, how the working group existed, and what levels of accountability there was with that. And then beyond that, I know John was one of the sponsors of a bill that passed asking for more reporting on what is happening in different chapters, so that people can, know more of that and gain from each other. And then also studying just like different democracies to see and different structures that other socialist orgs and things of that nature have, in an attempt to make our system more, work better.
Yeah.
And then, discussions over what should our overall leadership look like. We ended up expanding the size of the National Political Committee from, correct me if I'm wrong, John, 12 to 16.
Still 16. It's still 16. We were talking about changes, but it stays
And
16.
there was a
My bad.
like made it like way bigger, like 30 or 40 or something like that, which would have been. I mean, we can get into this particular question in a little bit, but that sort of like seems like a way to sort of water down leadership. But one of the things that I think was passed was what was it called? The Democratic sort of like standing, almost like a standing commission. Yeah, standing delegates essentially. Which I think does genuinely expand democracy. We can get into a little bit more specifics later, but I do think that also it's important to sort of mention that there is, and I think it's something that's worth bringing up, and I don't think it's provocative, but I think it's important to bring up because it's a real tension that exists within DSA that I do think is reconcilable. But there is a difference in sort of approach and tactics that has to sort of coexist between larger chapters in blue states in big cities, places like Los Angeles, places like New York City, just in like Northern California as well. There's sort of like there's a way that they can act and they can operate that is significantly different than what can happen even not just even in blue cities in red states like New Orleans, but like we have chapters that are in conservative areas in red states that just have to function in a significantly different way from these larger chapters, and they have to exist within the same organization. And one of the sort of like strongest critiques I've had of DSA over the years was that it was like governed in a way that and I don't mean to like cast any blame or whatever. I don't think this is anything that was done with any malice or ill intent, but essentially the sort of point of view or the sort of like subject of a lot of the decision making that's taken place within the organization has come from the point of view of the sort of larger blue state chapters, which is, I mean, not to say it's not representative of the membership of the organization or anything like that, but if we're going to have a broad, organization that covers the entire in the entire country, then we're going to have to find a way to square that circle.
I think that kind of brings us to the new makeup of the NPC and the absolute Louisiana sweep that occurred.
Dub.
Yeah.
So just to clarify for people, so in New Orleans, actually, so by the way, not only was it a Louisiana sweep, it was a Good Morning Comrade guest sweep, because former guest on this program, John Lewis, former guest on this program, Megan Romer, and former guest on this program, Francis Gill, the only three people that were all guested on the show, are all now on the National Political Committee. So if you want to ever become a member of the NPC and DSA, you know what show to go on, folks.
Kingmaker right here.
No. But like, to watch this point, like, yeah, we did have three people. Megan Romer, formerly of the Southwest Louisiana, Democratic Socialist America. Now she is in northern New York, upstate New York. John, who came over here recently to New Orleans from Baton Rouge, and also Francis Gill, longtime secretary and former co-chair as well of the New Orleans chapter, all now members of the NPC. So congratulations to all three of y'all. That's really kind of cool knowing three people in the NPC. I don't know.
Yeah, the fact that the NPC is like nearly 20% Louisiana, and at the same time, of the 7 New Yorkers that applied, only 1 got in. I'm like,
no way.
That's pretty cool. It's pretty cool, And I think that a lot of it has to do with like our candidates' tendency towards like compromise, healthy communication, letting chapters, decide what they need for themselves, and understanding their environments and working with that, whilst at the same time working to pull us all together rather than be more factional. I think that is, in part, things are influenced by chapter culture. If our chapters' cultures have always held these as important tenets, then those that join will, are more likely to adopt those tenets. But I think that a lot of it is also just like by virtue of where we live, we're inherently always having to work with people that we're not agreeing with on every single issue, and work with people that don't have super refined theory, because it is, a place with high levels of misinformation and propaganda and stuff like that you do have to combat. So I think that that's something that made our candidates more appealing.
Yeah, I definitely co-sign what Wash said there, because like it's one of the things that like I described to somebody where I was like, yeah, like I wish I would have got introduced to this like a whole lot sooner, right? A whole lot younger than I am now, and I ain't old, but you know what I'm saying. But like the thing is that like when it came down to it, there were no organized socialists in my area to do that, right? Like the closest thing you may have had like would have been the Louisiana Black Panthers, but a lot of them are just now getting out of jail, right? So like, from like being like people who were targeted by the federal government, of course, other things like that. But the key thing is that like a lot of them are just now getting out. So there were no organized socialists in our area until we became those organized socialists in the area, right? And it kind of goes from this sense of like, okay, well, like how do you get it out the mud? How do you take this and turn it into something else? How do you, like if I look at it and I'm like, oh, well, there's not a lot here right now, but the soil is fertile. How do we till it? How do we plant it? How do we cultivate something and grow something out of it? And how do we kind of like do that by engaging people, right? Because like the key thing is that like folks out here understand disenfranchisement. Regardless of where they fall on the political spectrum, they understand disenfranchisement. We have some of the worst educational outcomes, some of the worst life outcomes. We have some of the highest poverty across all of the U.S. and its colonies. We have, like, you name it, right? Like people here, whether they live in the city, whether they live in the rural areas, where they live by the sugarcane fields, by the salt mines, whether they work on the oil derricks, where they live in Lake Charles, Alexandria, Bunkie, New Roads, where they live in Monroe, Faraday, Bossier, Shreveport, you name it, right? Like they understand this, right? And the key thing is that like, well, what is the message that means, hey, we are talking about a political transformation for you. We are talking about empowering you, right? We are talking about like making that difference in your life, right? Because if you can't do that, then like you won't be able to activate more people. Like we're already downtrodden. We're already doing it. Like we ain't gonna come over here and shuffle with our heads turned down and be like, well, I guess I'm just go to work again. Like no. When the storms blow through, when the floods come through, when the new freezes happen now, because we got those too, I guess, right? Like we don't just be like, oh well, that's it. Nah.
Seems impossible right now with the temperatures that they are.
Like when it's hot like it is right now, right? Like we go out there and we hydrate people. When after the floods happen, you're gonna catch us mucking and gutting your house, right? Like after the hurricanes happen, you're gonna help us clean it up after the storm and trying to find you a generator, right? Like it's that tenacity, it's that unwillingness to give up. And I think that like tapping into that and also like going through that is part of what like makes that difference, because like ain't nothing off the table to try to like get more people and get more people power.
Yeah, I'm reminded of my own experience with Hurricane Ida, a hurricane that I myself had to evacuate for after the fact, and also like I'm on like while I'm evacuated at some place, I'm also like on the phone with people like trying to coordinate like how are we going to do this disaster relief for the hurricane? How are we going to help? It's just like a really kind of a like the objective is to sort of like help people out in this increasingly disastrous situation that we're all going to find ourselves in with the kind of trajectory of the world. We're reaching the bottom.
That's also something that I apologize. Go ahead.
No, just we're reaching the bottom of the hour. I got to really quickly do station identification. You're listening to WHIVLP New Orleans 102.3. This is Good Morning Comrade. We have Wash and John on the show. What were you saying, Wash?
I think that that's also something that was, if not talked about on like the floor of the debate place, the debate
The convention
room.
floor?
Yeah, that's a good word for it. That is something that I think came up with pretty much all the Southerners that I talked to, was how we need to create a net of a web of mutual aid for helping each other, sending resources to each other, acting as evacuation spots, acting as people that could take over the role that you were in, where you don't have to be evacuated and doing the disaster communications. That could be something that is aided by other people. In this, we can all see how dramatically climate change is increasing the number of natural disasters that we're all getting and the severity of it, and at the same time not seeing a ton of signs that our government is going to increase its ability to improve infrastructure or any form of recovery after the fact. So I think that is something that is like a collective worry across the South in light of all of this.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you something. There's been like a long sort of like internal debate in DSA about like the idea of mutual aid and whether or not it's like charity or whatever. And like, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But like, I will say that it's not like unself-interested charity, because if you're doing a specifically disaster like relief, you're looking out for your own self just as much as you're looking out for anybody else that's in your similar situation. So, mutual aid is not, in my opinion, based on the sort of like frame that we're discussing here, any kind of charity where you're doing something nice for other people. You are creating an environment where support for one another is the norm.
Right.
You find liberation through mutual aid. I don't think that there is socialism without mutual aid. I don't think that humans should exist without mutual aid. It is different from charity because it is including this level of collective liberation and analyzing the systems that you're in and trying to, during this process, analyze the systems that you're in and come together. I do think it's a liberative process.
Yeah, and I'll throw in too, and I'll give if we take it, and I'll follow that too and note that if we take this from a sense of we have to look at the interconnectedness of things, right? And we have to look at how society progress and how different relations between classes in society progress, right? And if you look at it from what I'm saying is that core of Marxism, dialectical materialism, historical materialism, right? If we go back to colonialism in the United States, right? We had different classes of people. We had a ruling class. We had people who were enslaved and turned into commodities themselves, and we also had the Free African Society of Philadelphia from 1786. From that single group, right, who practiced mutual aid, development of people, and tried to practice community support and outreach and other things to help folks out, you have a shotgun blast of all of these other African American, Black American, benevolent societies, mutual societies that goes back. This is all we're gonna coming back almost 300 years, right? Blown outwards from this, right? You're talking about the Underground Railroad, right? Because we hear about it, but we don't hear about the organizations that actually ran the Underground Railroad.
Yeah, that was a mutual aid network, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a network. It was a collective of people who were doing this for a long time. It wasn't just it wasn't just people running off into the woods. There was an organized system and process for getting people away from these systems, right? And they all kind of blast outwards from this point. So it's and people politicize this, right? You can find if you there's a really cool flag that says there's a really cool abolitionist American flag that says no nation united with slavery, right? And it's and the key thing is that they continually politicize these acts, right? Because somebody could turn and say, oh well, freeing the slaves or helping these people escape from slavery doesn't actually, end enslavement for them or end broad enslavement or end the system of class-based slavery upon these people. But Well, yeah, but it also fucking gets people out of slavery. Excuse my language.
All right.
I'll use my one word then. But it also improves people's conditions. It also changes their conditions directly. It also acts as a point to liberate them, to politicize them, and to keep them engaged. It's kept people so engaged that they passed it down for hundreds of years to do community support, to help other people, to take care of kids that aren't your own. Like you can literally just throw it into whatever search mechanism, research mechanism you'll find, and you'll find all of these things coming from those core ideas of like, well, can we help people? Should we do this? Is this about human development? Is this about people liberating people from oppression? Yes. And they'll do it. And they'll do it until the conditions change to where they could liberate everybody from it, So that's what I would say about it, to follow what Wash was saying, because Wash gave the perfect layout. We can still politicize this. Like, this is something to politicize and engage people around and try to get people to become or get activated as like, hey, you can do something about this. You don't just have to suffer underneath this. You can do something.
And also,
I think
go ahead, Wash.
I think that the Black Panthers are really great, one of the greatest examples of this, because the FBI literally said, like, their free breakfast program was one of the biggest threats to the United States, because it revolutionized people. And that's why they incorporated the free breakfast program as a federal program, so that they tried to take away some of the power that the Black Panthers had in providing this service that makes people like see how the government is failing them, and also with that, like, I think that there is a element of privilege in being against the idea of mutual aid, because for so many people it is a survival thing, and a huge quality of life thing. And for example, if you are hungry, you cannot pay attention in school. If you just generally, you can't do a lot if you're hungry. And I, again, am anti-charity, but I am extremely pro mutual aid and extremely pro giving things to people, as someone that works so strongly in the homelessness sphere.
Right, and charity is only necessary at the absence of all other options. Like, you'll take it, obviously, but like,
yeah.
Again,
that's a really good way of phrasing it. Is better than nothing.
If you got nothing else, you got to feed these. But again, speaking on the Panthers, we've been on this for a minute, but I think it's really important that there's also was a state response that was not just violence upon the Panthers that the state did to counter the Black Panthers free breakfast or free lunches or whatever, which was for schools to provide those things, which had not been the case prior. So and then in the absence of those sort of like networks and systems that did exist, you'll see that we're having the issue of now children being like literally exploited and like being put into a debt situation for their own school lunches, which is just like the saddest, most disgusting, like perverse kind of thing that you can think about. And speaking as a former teacher, yes, you cannot think the same way when you're hungry as you can when you're fed.
Absolutely,
straight up. It's the hierarchy of needs. Anyway, to circle back to convention, I really do think that was a great discussion on the topic of it. I do want to circle back to convention. What were some of the sort of major issues that were sort of up for debate? What were some of the major sort of like things that we can say, like, especially in sort of in hindsight, now that convention is completed, what were some of the accomplishments of this convention outside of the new leadership that's been a bit more geographically diverse and more sort of like representative of the broader scope of membership than it has been in the past, potentially?
I think a lot can be said about what we did on a financial level. Perhaps that's not super interesting, but
to make it interesting, DSA went into the convention in a like staring down the barrel of a financial crisis. How was that?
Yeah, that's very true. Go ahead.
I was going to throw in a light quick note is that we already have had, like, from the time convention occurred and ended, multiple people, like several hundred people, have already switched over to like actually like try to
Monthly
help the
dues.
organization get out of that situation
Mhm.
and put more into our coffers. And it's been going up every day. So something good, something something good did happen. Keep going, watch.
Yeah, yeah. So I think the resolution you're probably referring to is the new 1% for the 99%, which is recommending, trying to do a push, a campaign to get people to switch over to monthly dues where you pay 1% of your monthly income in order to help the 99%, which I think is going to significantly increase the amount of funds that DSA has, uh, even if only a small portion of people do it.
Mhm.
And also, it had better because we are now paying our leadership, which is really awesome. Another huge difference. If you wanted to talk about that at all, John, because I'm not fully sure of the logistics, but I think that that's something you might care a little bit more about than me.
Yeah. So, like it's the situation with it is that yeah, like that is going to like definitely like cause some readjustments around like different things, right? So like if I like I've been framing it as like right, is like the organization is like a political actuator or is like a part of an engine that causes stuff to happen, right? And so it's like if the organization is running effectively, then the organization is also like doing a good job of politicizing things, engaging in politics, and doing the stuff that is like we're talking about human development, helping people, other stuff like that, right? Kind of ending this class based oppression. But the other side of it is that like yeah, like how much money goes into which thing also determines some of that. I'm
I
of
mean,
the like
not to cut you off, but like it is like I mean, it's an old canard, but like a budget is a just a quantified list of priorities. It really is.
yeah, yeah, and like for my case, like I'm kind of like like we're in a position to where like the financial situation isn't amazing,
Mhm.
and I think this is a good thing for the people who may need that money. But like even for me myself, I'm kind of like like I want to try to see how much we can like improve our fiscal situation before I would like be like yeah I can take this extra money because like I'm not solely running for it, but the other side and like it would be nice to have it.
Mhm.
But I've also been of the opinion of like yeah like like I'll give it back to the organization until we're in a space where like we can say this is perfect, this is good, we're rolling, like we're everything is fine, and not that it's in a bad state right now, but
Mhm.
like we could be in a much better position than we are right now, right? And but I do think that for some folks they like this is something that can help them continue to organize. Like it can be stressful, it can be time consuming, it'll take you away from your job, you can even steal hours from your job by doing this different stuff, especially for the task of leadership, right? So it definitely does make sense as something to do to try to like help out our comrades, help out our folks, and help out leaders of the organization. But it comes down to like finding those spaces where like it'll work out, because I know some folks, yeah, like they absolutely 100% should take it, should use it, and should use it to continue to do the things that they can do to help support the rest of us when it comes to these things too.
Great. Yeah. I want to circle. I want to actually zoom in a little bit and be a little bit more specific um on sort of like how convention and some of the things that went down there affected specifically New Orleans and Louisiana. So, are there any particular takeaways that y'all can sort of think of that specifically kind of touched on Louisiana, New Orleans, or just sort of like local and sort of like regional organizations that somebody mentioned earlier? And what kind of like progression there could be sort of to sort of bridge the sort of seemingly very long distance between the national organization and locals.
Okay. I throw in then, so we, Jeffrey knows, like we've been trying to get, like we've been working on Louisiana DSA for like the last 2 years, longer than that, like really, but really making that push for it. And so like the key thing is, right, is that ideally you need different layers of like support, connection to different things, other stuff like that. And like for an organization that we just are not going to have billionaires dumping money into us to like do stuff, right?
They
We're going
actually
to
hate
have
us,
to
those billionaires, right? That's what it feels
right,
like.
right. We're going to be running off of people power, so it's kind of like, yeah, like if there's somebody who can help out all of our YDSAs or our young DSA chapters at the state level or at the regional level, then sure, we can take that and they can plug things in. If we have people who can help out our locals, people who can help out our folks who are in places like Bastrop, Louisiana. We got somebody in Bastrop for real too.
For real.
What up? But the other side of it is that like we can actually have people who can help those folks out too, right? Help connect them, help keep them connected to the organization, and give them a place to express it. And that's kind
And
of
make them see, I'm sorry to really cut you off, but
yeah,
make them feel like they're a member in the same way that somebody in New York
yeah,
is.
yeah.
You know what
Exactly.
I mean?
Exactly, because like those things, like because like the whole thing with them is that like is that if you have the mass to do it, then like you can absolutely do it. And there's two theories of like how I've seen like state and regional formations work out. Where like in one case you start out with like a larger state blob where like you connect everybody in the state together, and then they branch off. But the ESA kind of moved past that question already because we already have like a lot of individual cells. But the other side is that you take cells and then you form a new state body alongside all of them, or you merge them into a state body like they did in Connecticut. Those are all things. Those are a couple different ways you can do it. But the whole idea, right? Like Jeffrey just said, is that like if we have people continuing to operate in isolation, like you can't spell socialist without social. You can't spell these things without social. We are social actors. We do this as a crew, as a collective, as a community. And if people are disconnected from their community, they're probably going to wash out. They're probably going to stop trying to organize. They're probably going to get demotivated. Like they're probably going to start feeling down. And being connected, that keeps you around for another month, another year, another 2 years, another 5, 10 years. Who knows who else in your area might be like, oh yeah, I'm interested. Oh yeah, I'm down. Oh yeah, I learned about socialism from you. Oh yeah, like I'm engaged from this stuff. And oh, there's somebody else in my area. Then there's another person. There's another person. There's another person. We can recruit. We can take action. We can do stuff, right? I'm not feeling like I'm alone in Bastrop. Again, love our comrade Andrew. You good people.
No, I worry about the people in those places, like in smaller chapters and people that are sort of like at-large members and sort of remote situations, because I worry about the same thing. I worry that small chapters might just disappear if they don't have the support that would kind of keep them moving. I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry. I feel like I keep going on and on about this, but I think it's really important thing to kind of continue to hammer home. Wash, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, one of our delegates that came with us, one of our Louisiana delegates, was from rural Southwest Louisiana and had expressed frustration over the fact that, like, he can't easily attend social events that Baton Rouge or New Orleans is hosting because they are 2 hours away all the time, and how he doesn't have a lot of support for example, like running for a student board position, which I think is something that at the convention we stated was something that we wanted to look at more, since that is where they are, attacking so many kids, especially trans youth, which was also... I like that you brought up YDSA, because that was also a big topic of conversation, especially on the first day, because we put a lot of money into funding them better, generally supporting YDSA better, because, we're looking at DSA that has over, the past couple of years since the Bernie bumps, since the pandemic has made it more difficult to do things. I think it's reversing more now, but we had been going down in membership for a long time, whilst at the same time, YDSA was skyrocketing in how many members that they have and the actions that they are doing and the successes that they're getting from that. So I think that it was a good idea for us to put more effort into making there be a good pipeline from YDSA to DSA, which is one thing that I was interested in.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously, the colleges are sort of places where people can, you know, express these ideas that are in the remote locations already, and if that could be a way to sort of connect with the places, that kind of does fill in at least a part of that square. Um,
It
so
also, I am reminded of something that I heard people like say related to one bill or other. Who even knows? So many. It was so much. It was a very intense experience. It really all melds into one blob, and then whenever you leave the convention, you're like, oh, I have to remember how to be a human person, not like using Robert's rules,
yeah, life is
not
life.
motioning to speak.
Yeah, life is not governed under Robert's rules, generally speaking.
Yeah, thank God. But someone, mentioned at some point, like, how should we divide resources between, or chapters based on how likely it is for the money to actually have winnable results, which I think is just a nice way of saying we shouldn't fund rural and southern areas, in my opinion.
I don't think it's that nice.
Yeah, but I'll say it once. I'll say it a million times. Most Black people in the country live in the South. We are just extremely disenfranchised. The majority of trans people are born in the South. And I just view the South as the battleground of a lot of these issues. It is where it is starting, and it is where it seems like the fights are going to be happening. And it is annoying to me to think of people just deciding to give up on the area and protect their own locations better for their people, ignoring those that can't leave the South,
Yes, and I throw in there too, from the sense of right, if of it's like the organization can't be like, is if we're going to be a democratic organization, we can't just be like funneling stuff in a national organization. We can't just be funneling stuff like into like specific places or specific areas solely, right? Like there has to be something for everybody to plug into. So this also changes the entire way that you have to look at it, right? Like if we say that we're looking at doing like labor support, and only 4 to 3% of workers in Louisiana are unionized, right? And if you go across the South, the unionization rate is abysmal. And there's a lot of historical and modern reasons for why this goes on beyond just like right to work laws and other stuff like that, right? Like there's a whole history of like labor in the South where like general strikes were going on, but they steadily pushed and then used various mechanisms to separate them. One of those being racism, Jim Crow, other stuff like that, right? Like there's a hefty part of how this kind of all played out. But the key thing is that like if we just take the idea of, oh well, like you have to do XYZ for this thing, then yeah, like that limits the horizon for it. That also limits the ability for us to actually develop folks here, right? Like you could even take like you can even take Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, and Austin, right? Like there are not very large DSA chapters in those places. And you know how many people live there across the South still, in a red state still, right? Miami as well, right? Like we could go on. Like it's the key thing is that like these places are also underpopulated when it comes to how many comrades we have in these spaces. So just like Wash said about like how it kind of like he can sometimes end up like, well, only if this gets us wins. Well, yeah, like I don't think we're going to have a W if we have a Republican supermajority state government, right? Like we're not going to have that type of W. Our Ws are going to be counted differently. How many people are we activating? How many people are getting politicized? How many people are kind of coming engaged with like socialism or being engaged with it? How many people are we keeping active? Who are we retaining? How are we kind of like bringing a different perspective to how these things operate in other ways that we can engage around it? Like our political situation is just going to be different. But Louisiana is also one of the places that is very, very, very overrepresented in exports for the United States of America. Just from the mouth of the Mississippi River alone, we're the fourth largest exporter for the continental United States. Like so much stuff comes through here down the river system and is also produced here that like it also leads down the economic pipeline that kind of keeps a lot of this other stuff running, right? But the key thing is that yeah, like what happens if we unionize these plants? What happens if these places get organized? What happens if the people here get organized? What happens from these things too, right? There's a whole bunch of things that go beyond just like a short term thing of basically treating people like we're supporters or we're donors to specific projects that aren't where we are. Because if it's not a place where we actually have the power to impact something, even if that's getting another socialist a day, a month, a week, every 6 months, anything else like that. Even if that's something as simple as giving somebody some food, helping clean somebody's house out, dumping a generator off at their house after a hurricane, or anything else like that, right? Like that's still something that I think counts as a W.
And yeah, it's what W, like what the definition of W is. I mean, like obviously, I mean, I'm a supporter of somebody like AOC in terms of like what they can and do and like what they represent, and the fact that she actually would show up at picket lines and give out food or whatever. Like that's something that like here is unthinkable. However, at the same time, we can't at the same time look. I mean, I mean, really, it's a question of like low expectations too, which is, I mean, I don't know, it makes me kind of mad. It really underestimates the idea that like we can do that, things are possible in places that are sort of like historically, or not even historically, like recently, sort of like perceived to be like conservative bastions or whatever. But like, I mean, what was it? And I say this on the show all the time. One of the last elections within the past 4 years, I think there was a $15 initiative, like a statewide ballot initiative in the state of Florida, conservative right wing Ron DeSantis, Florida, that passed. So like there's definitely ways that we can score dubs. We just have to make sure that we know how to define them. We have about 5 minutes left. So I guess final takeaways from convention and sort of like what we have to look forward to, but we got to keep it quick. Wash, you want to go first?
Yeah, I am most excited about all these reports that are going to be coming out, telling us all the great things and getting ideas from different chapters and different organizations and all of that. I'm excited for all of the communication that I've seen between different chapters and the urges that people have for regional coalitions. I'm excited about how the NPC seems to be more focused on being transparent and being more willing to compromise and be checking in on things that are happening. And I'm excited about this 1% for the 99% campaign and seeing what we can do to get DSA in a better financial position. And just overall, I think that it's just a good sign of how much momentum is coming back in terms of membership, getting membership, retaining membership being very involved, chapters working together, and generally just work being done. So it all just made me very excited for the future of the org.
Cool. And where can people find some more about you, or like on Twitter or any kind of social media? Wash?
Sure. You can follow the New Orleans DSA Instagram, which is just New Orleans DSA, very easy to remember. And then you could also find me on Instagram as well if you wanted, at Not Doivash, which is NOTDOIVASH. And I'm sure that Jeff will, I don't know,
I'll put
emanate it into the minds of those listening, so it just like you can imagine it without having to
there you go,
put any effort in. I assume that you have that power.
Yeah, of course. John, what your takeaways, what are you looking forward to, and where can we find more information about what you're doing?
I would say straight up that like you have the opportunity to impact the organization. If somebody from a chapter with somebody with a chapter, if somebody coming from a chapter and coming from one of the states on the lower end of DSA population, coming from join the chapter and that chapter was dead, can end up in national leadership and on our interim steering committee, then like you absolutely can have an impact on this organization. you absolutely can make a difference in this organization. And through the organization and through your own actions, right? Like, you can make a difference in other folks' lives. Like, this is what it's about. It's about human development. It's about ending oppression. It's about ending class-based oppression. And we also want to end social oppressions too, right? So, like, it comes from the space of, like, it's not going to happen unless we take a stance, unless we try to do something about it. And that's what I want to say about that too. So when it comes to convention, people put the stuff together, put it forward, they put their ideas, they put their hearts out there, they put the stuff that they cared about out there, and they try to make a difference for it. And even if your specific proposal, program, or other idea didn't get through this first time, guess what? Refine it. Talk to people, educate, get buy-in, do the stuff
Organize.
do to organize, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, you can do that here. You can do that here. Do it. Do it. And you can do that, and you can learn to do it in your community too. And you can learn to reach and speak out to other folks. That's what I want to say about that too. And also, you can check us out at Join DSA. You just throw it in Google, it'll come up. Don't hit on Direct Selling Association. That's not us. It's dsausa.org. So yeah, they got our URL, but we're gonna get it back. They almost slipped up a couple years ago. They probably gonna try to up the price if I keep talking about it. But yeah,
we're watching as soon as they slip up.
Right. Join DSA. Try to make a difference. And like, I definitely think that you can. And if you listen to this and you want to talk about stuff, you can catch me at _common name on Twitter, on X, and all that. Maybe we'll have something different. Maybe we'll have a better social media thing come up. I don't know, but yeah, you can catch me there on X too, and hit me up.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, Wash, John. I really appreciate y'all coming on the show and talking with me about this. I really respect both of y'all and the work that y'all do. So thank y'all so much for coming on Good Morning Comrade. You can listen to
Thank you for having us.
Of course. Of course. You can listen to Good Morning Comrade every Saturday at 10 a.m. Central Time on WHIV LP New Orleans 102.3. You can also listen to us anywhere in the world, WHIVFM.org/wishing. WHIVFM.org/listen. You can also find more information, our archive of shows, everything at goodmorningcomrade.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we love you. Bye-bye.